Buenos días, buenas tardes, bienvenidos a este segundo día de la cumbre, cómo sanar un mundo herido. Hoy día queremos seguir celebrando a los artistas, a los creativos, al mundo de la cultura, pero sobre todo poner una luz sobre la importancia de contar con la cultura, las artes y con los artistas para la recuperación post-pandemia. Desde el banco nos hemos preocupado de eso y hemos trabajado infatigablemente durante todo el año pasado y este año para dar visibilidad a quienes están detrás del mundo de la cultura,
this world that has accompanied us through these difficult moments of the pandemic.
Y este trabajo
We haven't done this work alone.
no lo hemos hecho solos.
We have done it with others,
con otros que al igual que
others who are
están
working like
trabajando
us
para que
to ensure that
quienes
the
trabajan
workers
en el
of the
mundo
world
de
of
la
culture
cultura
have
tengan
visibility,
visibilidad, puedan
not just to
no solamente
receive
recibir los
support,
apoyos que necesitan, sino que
but
también
also
puedan
to
ser
invite
invitados a
them
la mesa
to
de
the decision
decisiones.
table.
Hoy que necesitamos
Now
repensar
we
el
need to
mundo, este
rethink the
mundo que ha
world,
estado herido
this damaged
en una
world,
sociedad
in a
post-pandemia.
post-pandemic
Me da
society.
es un gran
It's a
honor
great
para
honor for
nosotros, para
us,
el
the bank,
banco, que se
that
una a
Ernesto
nosotros hoy
Ottoni,
día. Ernesto Ottoni,
the Deputy Director of UNESCO,
la UNESCO, con
with
quien
whom we have been
desde el
working
año pasado
since
estamos
last year,
trabajando junto a ellos, además de CEGIP y OEI y Mercosur
along with
Cultural, para
Mercosur Culture,
desarrollar un
to develop a report,
informe, no solamente un informe macroeconómico del impacto del COVID en
not
el
just on
sector,
the
sino también una
macroeconomics
encuesta y un
of the
estudio de
impact of
políticas
COVID, but
públicas.
also a survey
La
and a
verdad
study
es
of
que
public
tenerte hoy
policy.
día, Ernesto, es un real
Having Ernesto
privilegio.
with us
Vamos a
today is a
escuchar
real
ahora
privilege.
cuáles son los
We will
aportes
now
que
hear
están
about the
haciendo desde tu
contributions
organización
of his
y, por
organization,
supuesto,
and of course, underline this commitment to collaboration.
realmente reforzar este compromiso de colaborar. Una de las
One of the
grandes
important
lecciones
lessons
que nos
that
ha
COVID
dado
has
el
given
COVID
us
es que
is that true
escuchaba el otro
innovation
día, la verdadera innovación que nos ha traído el COVID
that
es
COVID
la
has brought us is
colaboración.
collaboration.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank you,
Ernesto, y
Ernesto.
muchísimas
Thank you
gracias
to
a
everyone who has
todos quienes
connected today
se han conectado hoy y
and
ayer,
yesterday,
y por
and of
supuesto
course
a
to
todas
all
las
the
organizaciones que
organizations that
nos han
have supported
apoyado, los
us,
museos
museums,
multilaterales,
international
organizaciones
organizations
internacionales que nos han apoyado en esta
that have
cumbre que
supported this
busca
summit,
destacar
which
el
aims
rol
to
de los
highlight
creativos
the role of
y de la
creatives and
cultura en la
culture in the
recuperación
post-pandemic
post-pandemia.
recovery.
La cultura es
Culture
también
is
parte de la
also part of the
solución.
solution.
Muchísimas
Thank you
gracias.
very much.
Es un real placer participar en esta cumbre.
It's a real pleasure to participate in the virtual summit, Healing a Broken World, organized by the Inter-American Development Bank to reflect together on the challenges that COVID-19 represents to the cultural sector. Just over a year ago, the pandemic completely transformed our lives and deeply affected our sector. I would like to remind you that from the beginning, while health and other essential workers fought to save lives, men and women artists were also on the front line. At a time when thousands of millions of people in the world were physically separated, artists helped us to feel connected. They gave us consolation, inspiration, and hope in the face of the terrible anxiety and uncertainty, helping to keep the sense of us alive, even if only virtually. But we have to admit that artists have been seriously affected by the COVID pandemic. With the closure of cultural institutions and the cancellation of live shows, many of them have lost their means of subsistence. In addition, given the typically informal nature of work in the creative and cultural sectors, many today are without systems of social security, such as unemployment or medical insurance. Along with various other institutions, including the BID, UNESCO carried out a survey of more than 6,000 artists and culture professionals in Latin America and the Caribbean, which revealed that approximately 64% of independent cultural workers have seen their income fall by more than 80%. Today, more than ever, we know that artists have an important role to play in life and evolution of societies, and so should have the opportunity to contribute to its development and exercise their responsibilities in equality of conditions with the rest of the citizens, while keeping at the same time their creative inspiration alive. We should recall the recommendations that UNESCO made in 1980 concerning the condition of artists, calling on governments in the region to create and maintain the material conditions to enable the flourishing of this creative talent, supporting policies and measures which enable them to work, create, and organize themselves in a decent and favorable environment. At UNESCO, we are working to make this situation visible and ensure that the voice of the artist be taken into account in the political decisions of response to and recovery from the crisis. Among many other actions, we have launched the Resiliat movement, which has brought together more than 1,500 culture professionals from around the world to share their stories, express their worries, and make more than 100 recommendations to strengthen the cultural and creative sectors. Listening to them and analyzing in depth the various emergency measures that have been designed and applied around the world, UNESCO published last October Culture in Crisis, an international overview of responses to the impact of COVID-19 in culture. We have seen that states have taken various approaches, such as direct support, compensation for artists and professionals of culture, commissioning works, development of capacities, tax relief. There are many examples. But despite the fact that many countries have made important steps to support the cultural and creative sector, the temptation to exclude culture from the strategic plans for recovery is still there. For this reason, UNESCO calls for the complete integration of culture in post-COVID national recovery plans through policies and measures directed at the cultural and creative sectors that should be catalysts of the systematic and systemic change that we need in the long term. As a result of COVID-19, we have also witnessed a massive migration of cultural content online, even though, thanks to this transformation, culture has become more accessible. Artists and creators are usually the last to benefit from the consumption of this digital cultural content. In addition, the growing concentration of cultural content in a handful of digital platforms threatens to weaken the diversity of cultural expressions. In this sense, UNESCO is fully conscious of the necessity to demand fair payment to artists for the distribution and commercial exploitation of their works. UNESCO is inviting streaming platforms to revise the mechanisms of payment that have become, in many cases, the only source of income for these creatives, and join the global debate on the future of creative employment and its monetization. In the International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development, we should protect the role of artists in the preservation and promotion of heritage and the cultural identity of our societies, as well as ensure that cultural industries and creatives benefit from the technological changes. Only through the recognition that the strength and vitality of culture also depends on the well-being of artists as individuals and as a collective can we work to heal our broken world. And of course, build a better one. Many thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of our summit, Healing a Broken World.
For those who were not connected yesterday, I present myself. My name is Manuela Reyes, and I'm curator of the Unity of Creativity and Culture in the Inter-American Development Bank. Before starting, I would like to quickly tell them that we have simultaneous translation, so we can go to our webpage at the right-hand upper corner and click on live streaming and choose the language between English or Spanish. If you prefer to hear the audio in the original language of the speaker, you can do it in the player in our homepage. I would also like to say hello to our English-speaking audience and let them know we have English simultaneous translation. So please go to the tab Live Streaming in our website to hear the translators. Yesterday was a day of brilliant ideas. Very good speeches in which we reflected about collective imagination, social cohesion, and the future of our cities, among other themes. We loved having so many people connected, and above all, that there were so many people from the region following us. We received many inspirational comments through our chat, amongst them reflections on the artworks that we presented, as well as the people who were presenting. I'd like to share a few of these inspirational phrases that we received. Art is the motivating force that joins us together and inspires all human beings, and we are connected by this magic. Education should give a total change, starting from art, the development of other disciplines, and many more. Yesterday, we presented the first 3 works of the exhibition, Way to Healing, with the collective of Brazilian artist Bijari, followed by Lorena Wolfer from Mexico, and then the video action from Maria Jose Machado. Today, we'll be presenting other works that Stephen Henry Madoff, our co-curator, is going to tell you about. Stephen, please tell us what will take place today.
Thanks, Manuela. You know, if we think about yesterday's talks on culture as an engine for social change, about museums becoming expanded forms for what society can be, and cities being great places for empowerment, enrichment, and education, as being more inclusive, with our homes as domestic havens of safety and care, then today's panel of distinguished artists focusing on the idea of artists as first responders to crisis only enlarges the way that art and culture must be taken into account in policymaking. At least that's our goal in the panel. And we'll see this in different ways in the 2 art premieres today by Christopher Kozier and by Patricia Dominguez and Nicole Willier. So let me turn today to our first art premiere by Christopher Kozier and friends. Chris is one of the Caribbean's most intriguing artists. His work is visually striking and conceptually complex. And he's also a curator and institutional organizer, including his current position as co-director of the cultural space Alice Yard in Trinidad and Tobago, his home base. And in fact, home is the subject of this video titled Action in the Yard, in which Chris collaborated with younger local artists, Amir Denzel Hall, Robert Young, Suelen Chu, and Luis Vasquez Laroche. My notion of the work is that it gives us a rich sense of the Caribbean as a collection of island states in what Chris calls a perpetual process of healing and transformation. Cultures in a condition of constant struggle between a historical colonialist weight and personal improvisation, with the ideal of home as, quote, a sanctuary of the human imagination, again in Chris's words. So you'll see in the tenderness, restlessness, bodily pleasure, and the lush love of place captured here for the next 10 minutes in Action in the Yard.
Is like if one of us has this in the center.
Look at that.
You have to relax.
Faut laisser him sleep. Right. It's no time, just go to the driver.
What? You know what I'm saying? Alright, well, have a long day. Oh, like right now that.
Go.
Welcome. So this is the final panel of the summit. I'm Stephen Henry Madoff, co-curator with Manuela Reyes, And this panel is about the idea that artists are first responders, that they're visionary citizens in this sense. And so we've asked a distinguished group of artists to talk to us about their own ideas of what's to be done in this moment of the pandemic, upheaval and after. But let's talk about the specifics. We're talking about improving education, especially for the poor who can't afford to enter the digital economy of education now, about the precarious economic situation of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of workers whose situation has only worsened because of the pandemic, about gender-based violence, about racial injustice, about the frightening condition of the environment due to climate change and our carbon footprint, about colonialism and its legacy, and about what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. And all of these issues and more have only been amplified by COVID-19. So today, we're going to have a short introduction first by Trinidad Zaldivar from IDB, and then these four artists will speak in turn. Luis Kamnitzer from Uruguay and Long, the US, Ana Maria Millán from Colombia, Voluspa Harpa from Chile, and Chris Kozier from Trinidad and Tobago, whose video you just saw. They're each going to speak for about 5 minutes. Then I'll follow up with questions to each of them, and if there's time, I'll read questions from the audience. If you want to send us your question, you can do it through the YouTube chat you'll find on the Summit website. So let me first turn to Trinidad. Trinidad, we've spoken about the structural perspective of the positive engagement between cultural production and policy production, and I know you have some thoughts about that. Please share your thoughts.
Muchas gracias, Steven. Sí, en el año 2017 en el banco publicamos un libro llamado El futuro de la economía naranja, donde hablamos de las tendencias, viendo cómo iba a ser este futuro de
looking at how the future of creative cultural industry
una de esas tendencias era la de los artistas como primeros en responder.
One of these tendencies that we identified was as artists as first responders.
Cada vez más las sociedades, las comunidades, los gobiernos iban a comenzar a llamar a los artistas.
That governments, communities would start to call to on the creative economy. Hello?
We're having what we call technical difficulties. We'll see if we can come back to Trinidad in a moment. Why don't we now turn instead to Luis Kamnitzer to share his remarks.
Culture has been defined by its uselessness. The role of art in society has degenerated into a condition where art is separated from lived life in three ways. 1, art making is valued in monetary terms. 2, experiencing art is conceived as a leisure activity for those who have the time and can afford the price of access. And 3, artists are forced to choose between working for survival wages or to bet on the sale of useless things. Art's more important function of speculation and discovery is overlooked, and with it, the identification of leisure time as a creative time. I'm sorry. We don't accept leisure as a universal human right. Vacations are granted both as a reward and for improvement of subsequent work. To my knowledge, no government has developed policies to foster truly free, useless time and educate about it and the best way to use it. Shortening of labor time had to be extracted from employers, at least until it was coupled with technology and became a device that helped produce savings. Time, being money, is owned by a minority and dispensed by it, mostly to generate more money. As the orange economy, a neoliberal idea promoted by the Inter-American Development Bank, shows us, leisure time is good to generate even more money through consumption and services. It's not dedicated to develop creativity. We can therefore see that there is more than one kind of leisure time. Unfortunately, and especially today, for a vast majority of people, leisure and unemployment have become synonymous. For those that are employed, it often becomes time used to seek a second employment or do contract work to make ends meet. And then there are the affluent that truly may use leisure time for whatever they wish. All this means that to understand leisure time, it has to be seen connected with privilege. As artists, we either enjoy that privilege or are supported by it. Meanwhile, our supporting structure is collapsing. Can we then truly help cure the wounds? Art for consumption is transferred to a computer. In 2017, when museums and galleries were open, roughly 24% of the population in the US claimed that they had visited one. This is 3% below the figures of 2012. There are no statistics yet about how many people go online to keep their art experience alive, even if deteriorated. However, any count will have to consider that 20% of the population lacks internet access. Worldwide, it is 47%. 92.6% of those that have access do it over mobile devices. Even if art could help heal wounds, even if we had a magic tool, it seems clear that it would address only the afflictions of a privileged minority. It would appear that access to internet as a universal right is more urgent than any access to art. 2020 is a new year zero, and the virus is our Professor COVID from then on. This is not a construction that makes me happy, but it helps clarify things to myself. The wounds produced are not just confinement, sickness, the loss of smiles, and the loss of separation from loved ones. There may be periods of respite, but this describes our future, and inevitably we will adjust. The key question is the form that adjustment will take. Confinement increases alienation, and art easily becomes a refuge for self-pity and therapy when it should be a route to the revision of our premises as social beings. In our neoliberal societies, we have been educated to compete, to succeed, and to gratify ourselves as quickly as possible. Our art reflects this in how it looks, in what it does, and whom it does it to. This doesn't mean that we should stop doing what we're doing. So it's actually when dedicating work to the elite, especially if it doesn't harm anybody else and it helps us earn a living. What is wrong is to have this appear as the state of the world. We shouldn't fool ourselves hiding behind arrogance. The hope for cure is not and never will be in making and consuming art, not even if everybody could have access to it. The hope is in educating us to systematically question, evaluate, and reconfigure, and to then start again with questioning, evaluating, and reconfiguring. In other words, not to give so much importance to sharing the material products of art, but to share and collectively use the processes utilized to generate art. Our new era therefore requires a new education system, and Professor COVID is telling us why. Ultimately, we, artists as well as non-artists, are all in different degrees workers of knowledge. And knowledge is a collective, non-competitive enterprise geared to improve society. The professor has shown us what happens when we lose our way.
Thanks so much, Luis. That's a striking idea. This notion that there is no respite, that what a post-pandemic means may just be a different iteration of the pandemic. And your notion about education here, I think, relates quite well to what Ana Maria is about to talk about. So, Ana Maria, please join us.
When Stephen asked me to make a diagnostic from the perceptive, I thought a lot about the delocalization that we're living in, as well as the sensorial deprivation, the not being able to say goodbye to our dead. A lot of articles that I had read on the political climate during the Spanish flu in after the First World War. After this reflection, I'm going to go really back to 1918. In the
resuenan en las memorias las preguntas y gestos en el vacío de una generación que emerge del colapso económico posterior al exceso y derroche de los años 80 y de la violencia también.
The violence of the 80s and 90s and the despair of the neoliberal wave. In the story of Colombia, it's obviously a dramatic situation.
Cierro comillas, siendo estudiantes y profesores
Students
de la escuela
and teachers
de Bellas Artes en Cali a finales de
in
los
Cali
90,
at the end of the 90s,
forma para darle continuidad a un evento
they created an event
Wilson Díaz, artistas, habían hecho
joining together
billar de la
with
ciudad,
artists.
Festival de Performance de Cali.
It's a festival of performance in Cali.
Surge Elena para hacer una plataforma
But above all, they created a platform of dialogue and action
para los artistas
for artists
y para las comunidades
and for communities in Cali.
Así seguimos haciendo nosotros como Elena Producciones el Festival de Performance.
Thus, we continue to making the production of this festival.
La segunda feria de performance
And the second fair of performance was in the Paseo of Sports, Cali, a public school.
Donde hicimos un día de jornada de performance.
We did a whole day of performance,
y en paralelo una serie de charlas.
and in parallel a series of talks.
El tercer y cuarto festival de performance.
Then there was the third and fourth festival in the 2000s, in the first decade of the 2000s, and it took place in the museum La Tertulia. And here comes the story, which is about to connect with what Luis has talked about. We were invited for these initiatives, and then they invited us to take part in an initiative which is called Cultural Industries by the Inter-American Development Bank. And we weren't actually, it didn't manage to work out the invitation, and so we were not promised any payment. So this now connects with the question of orange economy. When the neoliberal thought liberates from responsibility towards culture, because we see the cultural rights vulnerable, but we are a sector which has been violated by the current political climate in Colombia. It's here where it's important.
El nacimiento de la Escuela Móvil de Saberes y Práctica Social de Elena, que se desarrolla en actividades de investigación.
Very important now that this new school in Cali, which is a school in parallel to formal education. It starts with systems based on invention, exploration, and we start off asking, what do you want to learn? It's very inspired by Ivan Illich.
Y que, por ejemplo, Beta Local en Puerto Rico.
And so, for example, Beta Local in Puerto Rico has adapted to his school. A lot of artists joined this project in Colombia, like the Garage School, which continue working with these questions. Art doesn't resolve anything, but it can provoke, and it makes possible processes and possibilities. In this sense,
esgrima con machete
that worked with the school,
en el sur de Colombia,
worked in the south of Colombia,
haciendo una discusión histórica política,
making a
sobre
political
historia,
and historical discussion about their own history, which also generated artistic products. After this, Elena Productions made a symposium in 2010 in Popayán,
que se preguntaba de qué vive un artista en Colombia,
which asked itself, how does an artist live in Colombia? How does an artist sustain herself?
Del cual Steven me preguntaba. Hoy, 10 años después,
Today,
de
10 years later, from this symposium,
y viendo todo el archivo de
and seeing the whole archive of Elena Productions, which is online, it looks like we're living the same story. It looks like a déjà vu, exactly the same situation. When the problems are not resolved, history tends to repeat itself. And in this order of ideas, creativity should respond to the student movements, to the necessities of sectors, to the feminists, to social movements, to help them relate to their own story and to a reflection together. How can we establish cultural policies that are clear? If historic reflection is not there and we're just repeating the same thing over and over again, and artists, just like filmmakers, we've come together to join a process, the law of cinema, which has been very important for the development of cinema in Colombia in the last 20 years. For example, the government is now threatening that law. We have to be very clear. Art is not just for producing information. It constructs heritage. It constructs memory. And for that reason, in the 2000s, at the beginning, we were invited to these initiatives because we wanted to have long-term relationships. These historical discussions, if they're not coordinated between them, we're not going to reach the necessary structural solutions in order to be able to sustain culture.
He desarrollado una serie también, digamos, ya hablando desde mi práctica individual, una serie de juegos de roles.
I have developed a series of role-playing games
problemas históricos viejos,
which put into play old historical situations in fictional groups of characters.
Porque estoy, digamos, próxima a participar en una exposición
I'm very shortly going to take part in an exhibition in fragments about memory and art. So I'm proposing with a game in a process with women and thinking about how these narratives from the past can contribute to now the processes of now through these fictional processes, always putting the technique at the service of consciousness of class, consciousness of gender, because all these digital policies are focused on individuals. And they're constituting what are going to be the pillars of the cultural future. My partner Claudia, often we talked about space, we talked about homes, we talked about everything in our country where the agrarian reform has not taken place.
Great. Ana Maria, that's so much to think about. And I want to come back to you, thinking about that notion of creativity responding so that people tell their own narratives and how those narratives can inform policy, can interact with the government, and the work that you're doing, creating a series of narratives now with role-playing is fascinating. So let's move on now to Voluspa.
Bueno, buenos días y buenas tardes para algunos que nos están viendo desde otras latitudes. Agradezco mucho esta invitación y poder compartir con ustedes algunas reflexiones y experiencias, tanto de mi propia práctica como de
from
una
my own
práctica
practice
colaborativa
as well
con
as
otros
collaborative
artistas, ¿no?
practices with other
Escribí un
artists.
breve texto que tenía que ver
I
con la
wrote a
noción
short
que nos
text
hicieron, nos plantearon para reflexionar,
about this subject,
básicamente la noción de la relación entre el arte, la
the
herida y
relation
sanar
between
heridas, ¿no?
art, wounds, and healing.
No productivo, no extractivo,
No productive,
no
not
eficiente,
extractive,
no
inefficient,
colonial, no
non-colonial,
progreso, no desarrollo,
non-development,
no ganancias,
no profit.
detenerse y cuidarse,
To hold on to
asombrarse
oneself
de
and
la
take care of
vulnerabilidad,
oneself.
ver y
To
escuchar
be
como
astonished
todo
by
se
vulnerability,
resquebraja.
to hear and listen
Durante
as
los años
everything is
2000
breaking
a
down.
2016,
From
yo trabajé
2000 to
investigando,
2006,
informando y
I
posteriormente
worked
creando una
investigating
cartografía
on a
latinoamericana
cartography
configurada a partir de los
of
archivos secretos
Latin
de
America
inteligencia de Estados Unidos
of
sobre la región.
intelligence
Esta investigación
documents from the
creación
United
me llevó a
States
formular
about the
una
region.
obra que la llamé
This then gave birth
irónicamente
to a
en
work
nuestra pequeña región de por
which was
acá.
called In Our Little Region Over
En
Here.
ella y en las obras
In
que la
this
precedieron e
and
hicieron
the
posible,
works that came
configuré la
before it,
dimensión de una trama
I
geopolítica de la Guerra
I
Fría
measured the
durante 60
dimensions of
años.
the 60-year-long
Comencé por mi país,
Cold
Chile,
War
y la
in
propia
my country,
información
Chile,
contenida en los archivos
and
secretos
this
me
information
llevó a los
contained in
países del
American
cono
secret
sur
files
del subcontinente
that led me to the
sudamericano.
other countries in the
Para
Southern Cone.
entender nuestra pequeña región
To
de por
understand
acá,
our little
seguí
region,
subiendo en mi investigación hacia el norte del cono
I
sur.
went to the north of
Los
the
planes
Southern
secretos
Cone.
se fueron
The
haciendo
secret plans
repetitivos,
were
las
repetitive.
maneras de llevarlos a cabo
The
se
ways
fueron
of
tornando
realizing
evidentes
them,
y los objetivos se
the
transparentaron.
objectives were clear.
En el curioso lenguaje secreto
In the
de estos
strange
archivos,
secret language of these archives,
aquello que en público es
what in
argumentado como una
public was called
ideología
a
moderna,
modern
en el secreto
ideology,
se
in
revela como
secret,
dinero.
it's just
Es decir,
about money.
el dolor, la
Pain,
muerte, el
death,
exterminio,
extermination,
tortura, golpes de
torture,
Estado se debieron a la
all
decisión de
this
obtener materias
was
primas
about
baratas con mano de
raw
obra
materials
barata.
and cheap labor.
Así se configura la herida
So thus,
latinoamericana.
the
En esta
Latin
pregunta
American
que tenemos
wound
hoy por la
was
herida y
created.
cómo se sana. Esa herida latinoamericana sistematizada por casi ya 6 décadas
This was
e infringida
systematized
por nuestros pares
during
estadounidenses.
60 years
Mi trabajo se
influenced
trató
by
de
the United
entenderlo,
States.
de
My
darle
work was
cuerpo a
try to
esa
understand
información,
this, to give it,
de delimitar esa herida, de
to
hacer de ella un
identify this
ejercicio de
wound,
comunicación estética
to make
y
this an
narrarlo a
exercise
las
of
nuevas
aesthetic
generaciones.
communication and
Me
to
di cuenta que
communicate to the
debía
new
ocupar ese
generations.
lugar por el hecho de ser mujer.
It was
Entendí
interesting
que
to
los
be there as
hombres
a
no lo
woman
harían
because
porque
men
eran
wouldn't do it
parte
because
supurante
it
de
was
la herida.
because they are
Hasta ese
themselves
momento,
part of
para
this
mí, el
wound.
arte tenía la función
At this moment,
de
art had the
configurar
function
y mostrar esa
to
herida,
show this wound
porque a pesar del canon,
because
aún era el arte un espacio de libertad.
art is still or has
Al
been
comienzo
a
de la
space of freedom.
pandemia,
At the
recibo la
beginning of the
invitación a
pandemic,
conversar por
I
Zoom con
received a
un joven
conversation
curador
to
llamado
talk
Tiago de Abreu
with a
Pinto
young
para hablar sobre mi
curator
trabajo.
called Pinto
Chile había
to talk
estado
about my
viviendo
work.
un proceso de crisis
Chile had
social
been living a
agudo
process of
durante todo
social
el año
crisis during the
2019,
whole of
conocido con el
2019,
nombre de estallido social.
known as a social
Jóvenes heridos
uprising.
con mutilaciones de por vida,
Young youth have
algunos
been
muertos,
wounded by the
hacían
police.
revivir
Some
el
died,
abismo de las violaciones de derechos humanos de las décadas
and
anteriores.
we were
El
reminded of the uprisings
2018
of
había
previous
sido el
decades.
levante feminista de las mujeres
In
jóvenes.
2008 was the uprising of the feminists.
A los jóvenes, claramente, no les parecía bien el mundo que le habíamos
The young
construido.
women,
Había un
this world they had
sentimiento de que la
created was not
sociedad
good.
chilena era una zona de sacrificio
The Chilean
económico.
society was a
En la
zone of
conversación
economic
con Tiago de
sacrifice.
Abreu,
In the
hablamos de
conversation
este
with Abreu
contexto.
Pinto, we
Hablamos de lo
talked
que en
about
ese
this.
momento parecía un comienzo difuso
Uh,
de algo extraño llamado pandemia.
Something strange
Ese fue
was
el punto de
beginning
partida del
called
proyecto
pandemic.
Al Aire Libre.
This was the beginning of my
La
project
pregunta de
in
qué
open air.
hacer con esa
The
energía
question
creativa
what to
que
do with all
habíamos
this
visto
creative
en la
industry
revuelta.
in the uprising in
La
2019 and
pregunta de
18.
si esa energía tenía
To ask
sentido
whether
o
this
tenía un
energy had
lugar.
sense and where would it
La
be
pregunta de si
situated.
el arte
The
serviría
question whether art could be
expresar y
useful to
contener un
express
contexto
and
así.
contain this context.
Ideamos sencillamente,
Let's
a
say
partir del proyecto Al Aire
simply,
Libre,
in
contactar
their
artistas,
open
convocarlos
air,
y que ellos
to contact with
convocaran
artists,
a otros
and they called in other
para
artists
hacer un ejercicio
to
co-creativo
make a
completamente
co-creative
abierto,
exercise,
desjerarquizado,
completely
no
open, without
institucional, que
hierarchy
se fue
and without
transformando en una
institutions.
especie de archivo de este
And it
momento presente.
start making a present
Esta convocatoria
archive.
artística tuvo lugar en
This
Chile y
open
reunió a
call
cerca de 80
was in Chile,
artistas
and it
y
brought
colectivos
together
en
about
distintas
80
ciudades y
artists and
localidades.
collectives in
Cada
different
uno de
spaces of the
ellos
country.
asumió la tarea
Each
de hacer
one
una
took on the task
obra-acción
of making a work action, defining, making a during 2 specific days in simultaneous, and send the recordings, even though we were living at the beginning of the lockdown. In Brazil, 2 months later, we did the same project. And 150 artists responded during the pandemic, without lockdown, and within a political official narrative that was just hallucinatory. And then 2 months later, we did it in Mexico with about another 80 artists and collectives. A country that was already seeing the impact of the first 6 months of the pandemic. What brought us together? What made us look for each other? What made us work virtually together, making an organization where there was no institutionality, no money, no security, no mercantilization. How did this project come together? In a gravitational field of attraction, a collective body of more than 300 artists. We're going to see a teaser, and I'm going to show you a video. Felipe Ríos, which does a little show, a little demonstration of what was made by this group of almost 360 artists. In this video, we ask, if the pandemic was already in the past, what kind of future are we living in? So please put on the video.
Ya tendremos ocasión de recordar de qué trata esto. Es larga la respuesta. Durante la pandemia se desplegó en Chile, en Brasil y en México un proyecto que activó obras, acciones, gestos físicos y que trató del afecto y de la libertad y de todas las cosas que no vemos y que son esenciales a nuestra vida. Trató de la potencia colectiva y del arte como co-creación del mundo y de la celebración de la simultaneidad de la energía de la vida. Lo hicimos juntos, en un momento en que el mundo cerraba sus puertas. ¿Y ahora? Ahora, cuando no existe pandemia, en este nuevo mundo y en este año cero, podemos decidir hacer algo juntos una vez más, hacer un lugar común, al aire, libres. Ahora reina la urgencia de un cambio y en combustión rápida descubrimos una fuerza oculta sobre el febril entramado de nuestras vidas. Ya tendremos ocasión de recordar, en un futuro cercano, cuando retornemos a un estado lleno de vida. Ya tendremos ocasión de recordar en el día de mañana que la posibilidad de hacer algo estaba en nuestras manos. Ya tendremos ocasión de recordar que el mundo había mostrado signos de cambio y muchos se reclinaron intentando imaginar qué habría querido decir aquello. Ya tendremos ocasión de recordar que la co-creación del mundo y la potencia colectiva y el afecto y todas las cosas que no vemos y que son esenciales a nuestra vida es de lo que trata todo eso.
Thanks, Voluspa. That's a very beautiful, powerful video. In a way, it's almost a summary of what the ambitions are for the entire project of the summit. So let me now turn to Chris Kozier to share his thoughts.
Hello, everyone. When I thought about this in the context of the pandemic, I thought a lot about the Caribbean as inherently a kind of ground zero for a sequence of catastrophes that has affected the planet. In other words, this is the beginning of settler, what you call the plantational scene, right? So to some degree, the struggle in the Caribbean to narrate oneself into being has always been in the context of a sequence of catastrophes based on its relationship to the kind of global economic system, whether it was sugar, whether it's oil, whether it's cocaine, whether it's bauxite, and all the different raw materials that have been extracted. And of course, with the transplantation of people who were conscripted into this industrial complex to create wealth and development elsewhere. So in a sense, to be an artist in a place like this is to be sort of always cognizant of the struggle between how one can be meaningful, useful in a meaningful way, and the old questions of viability, which always haunt our society. And as a consequence, it's really interesting. I thought it interesting when Louise brought up the concept of leisure, because most of the things that have defined the Caribbean and the Caribbean experience have been the things that happen between spaces, between plantations, between industrial labor camps of certain kinds, when people get together and do things. So that has all kinds of implications about how we relate to each other, how we think about institutionalism, education, because these informal spaces of association are also the things that have been most challenged by the pandemic. Because of course, the thing that defines us is the thing that now endangers us. So how can we then imagine our way beyond this? But I think that in the context of the Caribbean, the big question in our respective societies is that question about viability versus meaningfulness. I mean, we're small societies relatively, so it's kind of interesting that a lot of our legislative processes hold on to a lot of things that we've imported from, the European colonial period, and they're completely useless in terms of how, we can find our way forward. So for me, artists are kind of always in a state of rethinking, narrating, social relations, systems of education, concepts that make us a meaningful place. And when I was thinking about this project, I thought of the Caribbean or how the Caribbean can be seen as a kind of sanctuary for the human imagination. Because as small places, that's a way that we can be meaningful. However, our political class are still distracted by the kind of overseer settler viability model. So in a sense, they actually don't value the population. And the burden of responsibility on our populations is to value ourselves. And if you look at our journey, entering into this hemisphere, first as not even as people, as property, then we became subjects of various kingdoms, and then we are sort of on the road to being citizens of potential republics, and so how can we then, as artists, as people, sort of use this moment to put a value on what we've created and answer the question of how we can be meaningful, as opposed to just simply settling for the kind of viability model that governance. So the artists, I think, open that question always, The question is whether our political class are willing to listen or join us in that process. Because that is the work that we do.
Thank you, Chris. I want to come back to that and ideas that you and I spoke about previous to the panel about the Caribbean as a site always of exchange, and what exchange, mercantile exchange, the exchange of bodies for profit means, and some more thoughts on that. Trinidad, I wonder if Trinidad is still here and if she could rejoin us, or whether we've lost her. I think Trinidad has disappeared into the ether. And so, speaking of the ether, let me turn, Luis, to your text and something that occurred to me and a question about it, which is, I wrote down this notion of leisure time as a kind of oppressive time of capital and privilege. Has also, during the pandemic, and what we were saying before the panel also, things are changed. So such that screen time, which is the way that we consume art, the way that we consume everything, because we are now locked in our homes to a great degree. It also seems to me on the other side that even though it's not the same as seeing art in person and the power of that, which we all know and appreciate, still, it also means that art can distribute its message through these screens in a way that it hasn't done before, because people have not been on screens so much. So I'm wondering if that ties in any way to what you had said about, the issue that you raised of we must, as you put it, question, evaluate, and reconfigure, that we, as you put it, must share and collectively use art processes. Is there a relationship? Is there a positive side at all to this notion that in this world, which you're saying will continue, it won't be post-pandemic ever entirely, we will integrate computers and screens more and more? What does that mean? And is there a side to that that leads to greater knowledge through art?
It means that we have to accept that we're at a point zero and not at a point of trying to regain what we call normality. Normality was pretty bad as it was. So this really, the positive side of this is that we can see that normality was deadly and that we need to reconsider everything. So that museums now put a deteriorated image of their holdings to keep the ostentation process of their collections in the homes of people is not that useful, and not many people look at them. More people look at memes than at artwork, which gives us a message that memes may be the new language in which creativity and communication of educational processes can be transmitted. And it's accessible to everybody. Not everybody has an access to canvas and brushes and oil. It's expensive. You have to bet that the result may be of any use or any income. Memes are totally free, democratic, available. What they don't have yet is the ability of generate new knowledge. And I think that's our task. It's to see how can we use that new space, which will be improving with augmented reality, into our new medium that is available to everybody, not for consumption, but for creation, for articulation, for questioning, for helping our society become a set of communities that are not exploitative, that do not care about monetization, but care about improving society. And that's where this orange economy seems so smelly I'm sorry to have to raise this in the context of the bank that sponsored it. But it's alarming that the theory of that neoliberal false cultural push ended up actually holding a government position in a country and informing the whole policy of education and culture in that country. I think that's extremely dangerous. It's, for me, as dangerous as the erratic, crazy, ignorant, fundamentalist attitude in Brazil that is killing people every day to an enormous amount. The same as in India, the same as it was under Trump in the US. So that is where the zero state becomes helpful, because we now have a perspective from which we really can judge that, accuse the culprits,
right,
and try to develop a new society.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that Trinidad, who is suffering from technical problems, could join us to think about that. I mean, when we heard yesterday, it was interesting that Tomas from the bank had talked about, well, how can we fund technology for the creative industries as a way to move that kind of creative thinking into policymaking? But, you know, I wonder, Luis, if you and Ana Maria could come back, because it feels like, Ana Maria, what you were saying as well, concerning the issues in Colombia now, the immense difficulties that are taking place there, and the way that you've been thinking about not only education as a kind of distributed mobile medium, which makes perfect sense because, of course, we're all now distributed. Rather than being concentrated in offices or in schools, we are now all distributed. But also that notion of using new media, using gameplay as ways to educate, as ways to rethink the role of artistic process toward healing, towards exposing narratives.
Voy a responder en español y me voy a conectar con la respuesta que te dio Luis.
So I'm going to connect with Luis's response because it's related to the orange economy and the ugly that is for cultural world. Because with the excuse of the orange economy, artistic practice is being depoliticized. This cannot be a fantasy, a commercial fantasy. It's completely without politics, not critical. Technical need to be at the service of a historical consciousness. Technology needs to be at the service of reflection and discussions and proposals from the social movements. Only thus can we speak about games or technology development. Only in this way. Otherwise, it's what Luis said. Something very bad for everybody, for the countries which are putting levers in under this perspective of the orange economy. It's a commercial fantasy without critical viewpoint, which the only thing that it's going to do is make us repeat the violent history which we've been living with for so long.
Thanks for that response. I mean, I think, you know, from what you're saying, it's so crucial, as you said, that technology should be at the service of historical consciousness, and that criticality is crucial in the way that we think about the way that art, which of course has a long history of a kind of criticality, and the very notion of this panel of artists as first responders is about that kind of evaluation, that we're hoping could be adapted in some ways toward a greater role for the creative process to be thought through for policymaking. That's what to me is so exciting about the idea of the summit itself. I want to turn to Voluspa for a moment in relationship to that, because what's strong about that video, I think, is that idea that people from different countries, artists from different countries, were brought together in what might be called an enlightened unity. But I'm wondering, if you take the model, say, of that video, of that project, and think about enlightened unity, how do we adapt that? How would you think that we can adapt that as a kind of radical process for change in society?
Bueno, yo creo que en la conciencia que nos ha obligado la pandemia a la utilización de distintas tecnologías, ese encierro también nos ha demostrado que tenemos capacidad de organización, una capacidad de organización transversal tal vez, que atraviesa nuestras dificultades locales, y que tenemos una capacidad de coordinación que es posible que sea aprovechada mediante lo tecnológico y la construcción de un objetivo orgánico
through technology, but also the
común,
construction
¿no?
of an organic
todos los artistas que
aim.
participamos bajo la
All the
curatoría
artists
que llevó a cabo Diego de
who
Abreu,
participated,
participamos experimentando al mismo
we
tiempo
participated
la duda de lo que
experimenting with
estábamos
doubt.
haciendo, si lo que estábamos haciendo tenía algún
If
sentido
what
para
we're doing
alguien,
had
empezando por nosotros
any
mismos,
sense for anybody,
pero también
but
experimentando el
also
sentido del mundo del
experimenting with the
arte
sense of the art world
prepandémico, ¿no?
pre-pandemic.
O sea, como de alguna manera la creación, la creatividad,
As
la
if in
crítica
some way
que hay en
the
ella,
creativity
el abismo también que significa la creación
and
al
the
simbolizar
abyss
y nombrar
that is
aspectos
creation
de la realidad
by indicating
que solo el arte logra
and
condensar y
naming parts of
configurar,
reality that only art can
ver
configure,
cómo de alguna
to see
manera el
how
mundo
somehow
institucional del arte y el
in
mundo oficial
the
del arte
official world of
internacional,
international art,
apenas llegaba la pandemia, abandonaba
the
completamente
pandemic arrived and they
a los
just
artistas
abandoned the
y
artists,
no se ponía al servicio
and
de
they
encontrar
did not
nuevas formas
really try to find new
de
forms of
relación, ¿no? Y de
relationship
pensar
and thinking
el arte, como
about
decía
art,
Luis, pero también como decía Ana María, más allá del objeto del
thinking
arte,
about
¿no?
art
Y más allá del objeto
beyond
del arte
the
como una
object or the
mercancía. Y creo que
market.
este proyecto lo que
This
tiene es que es un
project
proyecto ágil,
is a very
rápido,
agile project, very fast,
que va entramando, va construyendo
which
una
is
trama
being
de una manera muy
woven in
sencilla.
a very
Las obras también
simple way.
son sencillas en sus materialidades y en sus estrategias, sin embargo, no por eso menos eficientes.
So the works were simple, but
Y al
were
mismo
not
tiempo
for that less
abren el
efficient.
lenguaje del arte
But at the
hacia
same
algo
time,
mucho
they
menos
open the language of art
institucionalizado,
towards
y por
something
lo
less
tanto ganan en
institutional.
libertad,
And so
¿no?
they
Entonces, ¿qué es
gain
lo que creo
liberty,
yo
freedom.
desde mi punto de vista que
So
hace
from
este
my point of view,
ejercicio?
what this
Es
exercise
que los
points out
artistas se toman y se arrogan el derecho
is
de
that the
establecer
artists
sus propios enunciados
take
y su
the right for
propia
themselves
enunciarse a sí
to
mismos,
develop
enunciar a
their
sus
own
sociedades
speech and to
desde una
develop their own
práctica muy
societies
simple,
from a simple
pero
practice,
eficiente,
but
¿no?
efficient.
Luego viene la articulación
And then there's the
en los videos,
coordination
son varios videos. Este video lo hicimos
with the
muy
videos.
sintético para esta
This
conferencia,
was a
porque durara lo
synthetic
que
video
duró.
and short for this
Pero
conference,
tenemos otros audiovisuales donde se reúnen y se
where
ponen en
we
relación
put
las
together
distintas obras, y
and
además
put
hay
in
otros
relationship
ejercicios
the different
creativos que
works
seguimos
together.
haciendo a partir de este encuentro de
It's a
personas
meeting of
que
people
no se conocen,
who don't know each other,
que nunca se han
who
visto,
have never
¿no?
seen each other.
Entonces yo creo
So I think that
y el video propone
the
también la
video
idea de pensar
proposes the idea
esta
of thinking about
experiencia
this
pandémica
experience, the
como un
pandemic experience,
límite,
as an
una
extreme
experiencia que
experience,
nos revela
as
todas las
an experience
vulnerabilidades
that
de las que de alguna
reveals
manera
all the
nosotros nos
vulnerability
hacemos cargo desde
that
nuestra
we
práctica como artistas,
always have lived with as
pero también
artists.
nos revela
But it also reveals
algo que también estaba presente en nuestra
something that's
práctica
also
artística,
practiced in our
artística,
cultural
y era una
practice,
crítica
which was a
hacia el
criticism
mundo del
to the world of the world in
pensar
which we live.
también
So
la
also to think
destrucción que
about the
produce la
destruction
pandemia
that the pandemic has
como
produced
una posibilidad de
as a
refundación,
possibility of to
¿no? Yo creo que estas
remake,
personas se reúnen
if these
con
people can
esa
come together
también,
in
¿no?
this spirit.
Y en una especie de espíritu común.
A sort of common
Lo
spirit, shared
experimentamos
spirit,
mucho,
which
hicimos muchas mesas de
we made
diálogo entre
many
nosotros,
meetings together.
Y en esa conversación
And in this
fuimos generando
conversation,
como una
we were
empatía
able to
que
generate
tenía que ver
empathy,
con una
which is
conciencia
to
de la
do with a
especie
consciousness
de sujetos comunes que
of this
compartimos
common
este
subject,
momento en el
sharing
mundo.
this moment in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously something that everyone has said here is how do we move from, what Voluspa, you had said about hold on to oneself and take care of oneself, and how we move from that notion of care for the individual to the care of the collective. That's the challenge that we're facing, and that what you've spoken about, what Anna Maria has spoken about, what Chris spoke about in speaking about what is that shift that takes place in the Caribbean as a kind of ground zero, which was about this sequence, as he put it, of catastrophes. How do we transform that notion? Because, of course, artists are always, as I mentioned earlier, in that position of criticality, of seeing ahead. Maria Belén said yesterday when she was asked, well, why is it important to include artists in the conversation? And she said that artists are always ahead of the institution. But the question here is, all of these ideas, which are powerful, emotional, effective ideas, how do we unlegislate what is being legislated now in the world, the rules, policies that have been in place that are no longer relevant, especially in the time and after the time of the pandemic, as Luis said, BV and AV, before virus, after virus. So these are the kinds of challenges that we have. I think we need to end on that note. I wish there were more time, but what's going to follow, as I mentioned yesterday, there will be, first of all, on the website, recordings of each panel, each discussion. Subsequent to that, we will put together a publication in which all of the speakers that you've heard yesterday and today will be writing essays, short essays that elaborate on what they spoke about. So please look forward to that. We're going to take a short break now, and then Manuela will be back with an introduction to the last video of the day. So thank you very much.
Es un gusto presentarles a las
It's a
artistas
great
chilenas
pleasure to
Nicole
present
Lillier
the
y
Chilean
Patricia
artists
Domínguez,
Nicole
quienes se han
Lillier
unido para esta
and
ocasión
Patricia
especial
Dominguez,
para
who
crear
come
el
together for
último
this on a
paso de
special
nuestra
occasion to
exposición
create the
a
last
través de
step
la
of our
obra Leche holográfica.
exhibition through the
Para
work
contarles un poco acerca de
Holographic
ellos,
Milk.
Nicole Lillier es
To
una
tell
artista
you a
transdisciplinaria,
little bit about them,
actualmente radicada
Nicole
en Boston.
Lillier is a
Por medio de
transdisciplinary
sonidos y
artist currently
vibraciones,
living in
su trabajo
Boston.
explora
Through
desde
sound
lo
and vibrations,
microscópico
her
hasta
work
lo
explores
cósmico.
from the microscopic up to the
Actualmente es
cosmic.
candidata
She's now
doctoral y
studying for a
asistente de
PhD and
investigación
is an
en MIT
investigation
Media Lab,
assistant
en
in
el grupo
MIT Media
Opera
Lab
of the
in the
Future.
group Opera of the
Por otro
Future.
lado, Patricia
Patricia
Domínguez trabaja la
Dominguez works
investigación
with
experimental en torno
experimental
a
investigation
etnobotánica.
around
Es
ethnobotany.
directora de la
She is
plataforma
director
Estudio
of the Studio
Vegetalist.
Vegetalist platform.
Recientemente ha
She has recently
participado en la Bienal
participated
de
in the
Gwangju en
Biennial of
Corea
Gwangju
y
in Korea
Transmedial
and
Berlín, entre
Transmedial
otros.
Berlin.
Ambas artistas
Both
recibieron el
artists
premio
received the
Simetría
Symmetry
para
Prize
participar en una
to
residencia en el
participate in a
Laboratorio
residence
Europeo
in
de
the
Física
European
de
Organization
Partículas
for Nuclear
CERN en
Research in
Suiza
Switzerland
y los
and
observatorios
astronomical
astronómicos de Chile.
observatories in Chile.
Leche holográfica es una
Holographic
súplica
Milk is a
meditativa.
meditative
A partir de
appeal
la comunión
from
de
the meeting
sonidos
of
e
sounds and
imágenes que
images
fluyen
which
en la
flow in the
dulzura de
sweetness
la
of
leche
holographic milk.
holográfica,
The
las
artists
artistas nos
invite us to
incitan a
imagine new
imaginar nuevos
futures
futuros
based on
basados en una
sustainable
producción
and non-extractive
sustentable y no
production.
extractivista. Los
We invite you
invitamos
to
a
dive into
sumergirse
this
en un viaje
metaphorical journey
metamórfico
of
de
connection.
conexión.
Entremos en silencio digital. Cierren por favor sus otros tabs abiertos y sus celulares. Viajaremos al campo cuántico a realizar una petición para que se activen todas las posibilidades que están latentes dentro de nosotros, para seguir para el futuro. Cerramos nuestros ojos digitales y abrimos los portales hacia el sur. Simplemente los abrimos. Ahora, avanzamos más arriba por la hélice de nuestro ADN, hasta llegar a una pileta llena de leche holográfica. La leche de la Gran Madre. Saludamos y pedimos permiso para introducirnos en ella. Nos hundimos. Entramos. Viajamos por el tiempo y el espacio insondable del espacio cuántico hasta llegar a nuestro ADN. Accedemos a la información que tenemos dentro. Pedimos que se decodifiquen los códigos que encuerpamos. En el espacio cuántico no hay distancias. En el espiritual tampoco. Nos repartimos en el aire cósmico que todos respiramos, en los píxeles que todos miramos, y cruzamos a través del portal del sur. Gran Madre, nútrenos con tu leche holográfica, la que contiene toda la información del futuro. Recibimos tu leche que nutre a todas las multiespecies y a los elementales. Leche que está hecha de cuarzos, tierra, plantas, sol y viento. De chips y circuitos eléctricos. De todos nuestros ancestros y personas por venir. Nos conoces a todes. Somos todes un solo cuerpo distendido en el planeta. Devuélvenos todo lo que el sistema lineal ha dejado afuera. Calíbranos nuestra brújula espiritual.
We are going to remove that dense energy so that it flows into the earth. We activate a channel of light from where you're seated to the crystalline center of the earth, where the quartz crystals live. Go down to those quartz. Choose one. Anchor yourself to it. Connect to it. Simply connect. Those quartz are great amplifiers of energy, given their piezoelectric qualities. They are violently extracted to form part of the silicon chips for our mobiles and computers. From the bottom of the earth, they are transferred by people and machines to the center of those chips that accompany us day by day, amplifying and retransmitting your information from your mobiles and computers. From there, they continue delivering us their crystalline frequency to protect us amidst the system of fatigue.
Madre, háblanos a través de nuestros sueños. Cántanos la canción que nos devuelva nuestros ejes personales. Comandamos que se activen nuestras tecnologías orgánicas. Tenemos toda la información que necesitamos en nuestras células. Activación inmediata y permanente. Nuestro cuerpo guarda miles de gigas de información, los que procesa orgánicamente. Somos más que un computador de carne. Comandamos que se decodifiquen las informaciones de las ondas magnéticas que nos atraviesan. Activamos un reseteo no lineal de todas nuestras células y millones de organismos que han creado sus seres emergentes para conformarnos durante el tiempo y espacio, que seamos cada uno de nosotros antes de diluirnos en miles de elementos que seguirán sus propios porvenires y otras emergencias. ¿En cuántos seres nos transformaremos? Madre, enséñanos cómo autorregularnos para cruzar estos portales nuevos que vienen. Respira. Deja que la nueva información que estamos recibiendo se ordene en nuestros seres para seguir. Respira. Nos hemos deconstruido y vuelto a armar en pedacitos en un gran tótem que contiene a todas las especies y personas del mundo. Un tótem que es hogar para todas nuestras identidades. Home for all your identities. Avanzamos ahora como un tótem, todes juntes. Avanzamos. Fuera. Somos una vasija de cerámica, una olla común. Somos cuerpos de tierra. Nuestra energía, el sol. La luz de las pantallas de nuestros celulares. Activar una tecnología en pos de la comunicación, el bien común, lo comúnmente planetario. En la leche holográfica que nos traspasa a todos. Llévame a ver mi sombra, mis nudos, para poder desatarlos mirándome desde la espalda. Hazme invisible a mí misma. Hazme transparente. Pide tu nuevo nombre, un nuevo nombre para ti, para su ser del futuro. Bendícete, mándate fuerza. Es importante renombrar alguna vez en la vida, pídelo, simplemente pídelo e incorpóralo a tu ser. Recibimos esta leche y permeamos nuestra identificación del cuerpo hacia afuera, hacia todes, hacia los elementos. Para repensar la realidad desde múltiples dimensiones. Escucha. Escuchemos juntos. Y afinemos nuestras frecuencias con el campo magnético de la Tierra. Entremos todos juntos en resonancia digital. Toda la información está localizada en el borde que nos envuelve, en nuestros espacios liminales. Abre la percepción para rearticular la realidad desde sus bordes. Recuerda que la estructura del universo es modulada por entidades invisibles y que la base de nuestra existencia proviene de eventos catastróficos. un gran estallido inicial. Rearticulémonos desde ahí y encontremos un espacio común, un hogar para todas nuestras identidades, a home for all our identities.
Ahora, Manuela. Otro segundo.
Para culminar nuestra cumbre, hagamos un breve repaso de lo transcurrido estos 2 días
I'd like to
sobre
just
las
have a
discusiones y
little
exposiciones.
rerun of what
Healing
happened
a
over the
Broken
last few
World
days.
reunió a 2 públicos que
Healing
no se
Broken
sientan
World
normalmente
brought
en la
2
misma
publics
mesa,
together,
el sector cultural,
those
quienes
from the
tomadores de
culture
decisiones y hacedores de
and those who
políticas
take
públicas.
decisions.
Contamos con la participación de
We had
artistas,
participation from
líderes
artists,
culturales,
cultural leaders,
economistas y
economists,
urbanistas de toda la región.
urbanists from the
Se
whole region,
discutieron las diferentes
who
maneras
talked about the
sobre cómo
different
el arte y
ways
la cultura juegan un
in
papel
how art
relevante
and
en el
culture could
proceso
play
de
a
reconstrucción
relevant
de América
process
Latina y el
in the
Caribe.
recovery of Latin America
Manténganse
and the
por favor
Caribbean.
todos al tanto sobre los próximos
So
pasos de esta iniciativa que
keep,
continuará a
please,
través de
all of you,
diferentes
stay
productos de
tuned for the
conocimiento.
next steps in this
Si
initiative.
bien la cumbre, esta vez virtual, termina en unos
Even though the
minutos,
summit will
nuestro trabajo
finish
continúa
in a
y
little
tendrá
bit,
un
our
largo
work
recorrido.
will be carrying on.
Realizaremos una
We're going to
publicación
make
mostrando
a
recomendaciones
publication
prácticas de las ideas que conversamos estos días.
around the
Y
ideas
encontrará
we've
en
talked
nuestra
about these
página
few
web
days,
los videos
and that
de
you
los
can
paneles
find in
de
our
discusión y de
website
las
the
performances.
videos of the performances
Quiero
and the
agradecer
panels.
especialmente a todos los que nos acompañaron
I'd
en
like
este
to
proyecto,
thank especially for all
especialmente
those
a
who
las
participated
instituciones
in this
culturales,
project,
los museos
in
y
the
agencias
cultural
multilaterales,
institutions,
así como
museums,
nuestros panelistas,
as well as
artistas
the
y el
panelists,
equipo interno de la
artists,
Unidad de
and the
Creatividad y Cultura
internal
del BID, que hizo que esto fuera una realidad, así como
internal
nuestros
team of the
socios de
bank,
la División
which
de
made it all this a
Vivienda y
reality.
Desarrollo Urbano. Para mí, siendo artista visual
For
y
me, as a
curadora de
visual
una
artist
gran
and
institución
curator,
como lo es el BID, ha sido un
and
sueño
this
hecho
great
realidad,
institution
tender
that
los
is the
puentes entre ambas disciplinas,
IDB,
esta vez con el fin de apoyar nuestra región.
now we want to support
Desde el
our
BID
region.
continuaremos
From the
amplificando las
IDB, we'll
artes
be
y la cultura de
continue
América Latina y el Caribe para apoyar a una
amplifying
región que
our
hoy nos
support
necesita más que nunca.
to culture in the
Si bien la
region.
crisis ha traído obvios e inmensos desafíos,
If the crisis
se
has brought
abren las
obvious and
puertas para
huge
nuevas
challenges,
oportunidades y
it's
sanación
also
social
opened
hoy.
up doors
En
for
esto,
collective
el
healing
arte y las
and
diferentes
opportunities.
industrias
In this
creativas y
sense,
culturales
art and the
estarán a la
different
delantera del timón.
cultural industries
Steven,
are
do you
very
want to
relevant
give us
now.
some final remarks
Stephen,
about
do you want to
these
make
2
some
days,
final
please?
remarks?
Sure. Yes. So when I first thought about this summit with Manuela, of course, we were thinking about the situation that we're all in the world today, and the inequities, the difficulties that the world is facing, these regions are facing. And this is only the beginning of the conversations and the work to be done, as Manuela just said. How do we work toward the post-pandemic? What does that mean in our sense of sociality, of reconstruction, of rethinking policies? And of course, when we think about cultural producers, we're thinking about producers, we're thinking about people who do. And therefore, what is the evolution that we can now think about of doing through culture toward policy change? How do artists think about moving from art as a picture of politics, in a sense, to being a partner in politics? And the other way, of course, how do policymakers think about artists and cultural producers, the creative industries, as partners in how we'll shape society, how we can actually make society change? Because, of course, the upheaval that we're seeing is also, as I said yesterday, upheaval is a chance where things are breaking open, breaking up, so that there is the opportunity for change. And what we heard from institutional leaders, of course, was that institutions themselves must react, must be responsive, have an opportunity to change how they reach audiences through technology, but also as community centers, as new forums for thinking locally. And that relates to the way we spoke yesterday about cities and urbanism, and should be, of course, thought about in terms of the countryside and how the rural and the urban are shifting because of new technologies, new means of communicating with one another. And then we heard today about the artists and their point of view, which of course is dramatic, is full of challenges, and thinking about breaking rules, of demanding the way that we can change things in society, and that's good. It's an open discussion, and I know that IDB, in its support of culture, is in support of those kinds of conversations towards change. So I'll just end by my own thanks. This has been an extraordinary project. We'll continue with the publication. But I want to thank Manuela Reyes and Trinidad Zaldivar and the person behind the scenes who you have not seen, Javi, who has done remarkable work in bringing us together. So thanks to all of you, and I hand it back to you, Manuela.
Thank you very much, Steven. Muchísimas gracias a todos y hasta la próxima.
Everybody, and we'll see each other soon.
It's time for drinks.
Yes, right. So